Hello and welcome back to Global Days of Listening. This is a Solstice edition where we're focusing on education and the difficulties that young Afghans have around education. And I would like to introduce our next guest, who you are all very familiar with, Mujib Abid, who is a PhD candidate at Sydney University, where he studies the American occupation of Afghanistan and the acts of spectacular resistance by native Afghans. Mujib also works as a sessional lecturer at the Western Sydney University. Welcome, Mujib.
Thank you very much, Maya. Thank you to everybody for having me. Can you hear me clear?
Yes, Phil. Yes, please.
Terrific. Thank you. I'm very glad to be here with our friends from across the world, especially our friends in Kabul. So I was asked to speak in English. So friends in Kabul.
Well, you know what, Mujib? Why don't you speak in Dari and then you can give us the summary in English, because I think the priority goes to our friends in Kabul. So I think it's most important that they understand first and then summarize for us.
Okay. All right. Is that okay, Hakim?
Yes.
All right. Okay. اوکی خوبه خیلی درست است. دوستان عزیز سلام به همه‌تان. بازم بسیار خوشحال هستم که all right. Okay. So our English speaking friends, I do apologize that I think that was a little long-winded, but I'll try to keep it short from now on. So I was just talking about the way that violence obviously can, take the form or that Galton talks about, the cultural form, cultural violence, but then how that is most pertinent and most easily, I suppose, detectable in the education sector. That it's just trying to highlight the importance of the more opaque and in many ways perhaps more consequential cultural forms of violence that in a place like Afghanistan you can see has very much sort of penetrated the education system. So in Afghanistan, the fixed epistemic implications of its war, right? So not just the material implications of war, but also the epistemic, the cultural implications of the war are easily detectable in the way that schools in particular, but also universities, because universities have especially University of Kabul has a particular place in Afghanistan's recent history. And so just talking about why that's important, and also how if we try to identify or place this in our last, say, Afghanistan's last 50 to 60 years, we can see that the Mujahideen and the communists were really the first two groups that used education and educational facilities to kind of really sort of a very effective to an effective end to kind of promote their ideologically charged and indeed violent discourses. In case of Mujahideen, and I was telling them and they were giggling, I'm part of this generation where our school textbooks had, guns and knives and rocket propelled grenades and AK-47s, and that's how we learned how to add and multiply and subtract and so on and so forth. And the same with our language books. But then that wasn't just unique to Mujahideen. The Soviets, or not the Soviets so much, but the Marxist Afghans and some of the Maoists as well used educational facilities really to excellent effect to promote their own very particular ideological agendas. And so you could see that Kabul University's campus, starting from mid-60s, became this hotbed of ideological tensions and conflicts and disagreements. But not only that, the school training institutes were also kind of the school training institutes were also very much closely I suppose we can say influenced or penetrated or impacted by these new almost important ideologies. I'll go back to Farsi now. I'll try to keep it short. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. That's a very interesting history that you've given us and background that's very helpful to understanding the background for Afghanistan and education.
Thank you very much. Now, دوستای عزیز در کابل they get that, so it kind of goes back there. So the same with Taliban kind of took it to new extremes. This triad between, you know, the education systems on the one hand and war on power on the other hand, whereby, you know, this particular curriculum was complemented by their, you know, under-resourcefulness and their isolatedness, whereby, you know, those math textbooks I was talking about were now taught along with Sharia, state-imposed universal Sharia curriculum. And I was a part of kind of that generation as well. So as we were growing up, we were still in school. So Taliban not only didn't help with the situation, but they kind of further pushed their agenda and through the education system. Now, all پس باز در دوره فعلی دوره بعد 2001 میگیم یا اول 2002 بریم که از این بعد 2 سال بیدار باشیم. So just going back to English just briefly, this form of cultural appropriation that I was talking about under the Soviets and under the Soviets and under the, you know, Mujahideen and then afterwards the Taliban, it hasn't, the attitudes haven't shifted much in the post 9/11 occupied Afghanistan. If anything, the only thing that has happened ever since that I could see is that now the Kabul government and their Western supporters are a lot more capable at kind of creatively hiding their particular agendas while still using the education systems to promote very particular, very violent, very hegemonic discourses, right? So there's this discourse of binary logic that's almost pervasive and almost taken for granted in series of curriculums that you know, take capitalism for granted and doesn't even question that takes westernization in a very utilitarian sense for granted, that critical thinking is only giving sort of a lip service, you know, whereas it's very important for a functioning democracy. And so we were just talking about that and talking about the American University of Afghanistan and what that means in the greater scheme of sort of the American scheme for Afghanistan. This particular university with a very small student body, but yet when I was a student, we had 1,200 students. And when I first started, I think the number of students that were like 500 to 600. And yet it looked like the whole of the country knew about this small university. There's a reason for that. That's because USAID and US Embassy used this particular institution to absolute perfection for their own very particular propaganda campaigns, to kind of make it look like, you know, this is to turn it into and use it as a signifier of American generosity, and also to say that we're not here just to engage in a war, but also we're helping Afghans. Do I have time?
Well, maybe we could hear some responses from Kabul, that because you've given us so much interesting information, and I'm wondering what the Afghan peace volunteers are thinking about that now, and if they have any direct responses.
That'd be lovely. Okay, thank you guys.
جوانان کدام فکر دارین مقابل حرف مجیب؟ تشکر. شما جواب بدین.
Do you want to translate? Do you want to translate? It's a very important question.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Right. So Hakim, what's our friend's name?
Farzana.
Farzana. So Farzana John was asking me, you know, that's all good. You know, you're saying that the education system is all, you know, problematic and has been used for very particular reasons. But she says, I'm also teaching Quran and other Quranic studies and religious studies at home to her students, if I got it correctly. And that the Quran also says, has passages and promotes particular discourses that could be quite violent, or indeed quite violent. I think she gave the example of how it says not to be friends with non-Muslims. And so she's wondering, what can we do then in a state like that? This is the system, corrupt and problematic as it might be. So she was asking me what could be done.
Okay.
So which is a very which is a very, very important, very crucial question. And look, and so I don't, to be honest with you, I don't have very many answers to that. Let me say it in Farsi, and maybe somebody can translate later. But Farzana John, jawab.
Mujib, would you like to very briefly summarize your answer, and I'll just add on small. I'll add on a small little thought. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Look, so I was just telling Farzana how I intentionally don't want to give her a very particular response, even though perhaps I can sit here and speculate. But I think that it would be just that, it would be speculating, because one of the things that a modern education system or modern approach to knowledge or attitude to knowledge does is that it perceives that every question has an answer, a universally applicable, everywhere to be true, objective answer. And I don't believe in that. So instead, I was just talking to Farzana. I was telling her how her very particular context as a female Afghan who teaches Quran also assumes or perceives that she will be teaching at school at some stage, and then on top of all of that is involved in circles like Afghan peace volunteers. Now that particular contextuality is what could inform her approach to both deal with all these with this particular education system, and then on the other hand, sort of to incorporate her own principles, values, and critical engagement with the education system. So it's a non-answer, but I think it's intentional.
Thank you, Mujib. Let me give a small thought for Farzana and the youth to think about in Kabul. And perhaps I do have a role with APVs in being sometimes more direct. So with Farzana's question, Farzana John, tashakur barai sawal shuma. I had suggested to Farzana, as is sometimes my small little role among the APVs, to offer some thoughts, personal thoughts, more directly. I suggested to Farzana that in her own personal life, if she encounters any teachings, be they religious or otherwise, that she is unsure about, she need not repeat those controversial statements to her students. She can leave out that statement. And that's entirely within a teacher's prerogative. Instead, maybe with that specific line of not becoming friends of non-Muslims, I would suggest to Farzana and the other youth that as Muslims and as teachers, they could share with their students their own personal faith as Muslims. For example, they could tell them, instead of saying or repeating the line that they shouldn't be friends with non-Muslims, they could suggest from their own personal point of view that their students could be friends with non-Muslims, to get to know them and to be able to interact peacefully with them. These are, of course, I agree with Mujib, very personal decisions, and I feel that the youth need to think about the personal decisions that they can take. I'd just like to ask one very practical question for Mujib that may be on the minds of the youth that I know quite well in Kabul. Many of the youth are grappling with this idea, and this idea has, over the past 16 years, been very successfully propagated by the American University in Kabul, that the English language is the superior language and therefore needs to be mastered by any successful student, and a student who does not speak English well is not a clever or successful student. And secondly, I heard from two students of, one student of the university now, that every student in that American university in Kabul will be the elite leaders of Afghanistan tomorrow. They are the they are the special elected youth who would become the Nukhbagan and elite of the entire country, and that does affect the interactions that exist at among the APVs. With some of the youth now, we have I think 3 or 4 of our youth studying at the university.
Right.
And perhaps you could also give us and the youth an idea of what you think about them buying into that narrative, and therefore all of them wanting to look for opportunities to study at that university. That your call for them to be awake, Baydor, is important at this time. Thank you.
Tashakur, thank you. No, I think that's it doesn't even require me to reflect to some personal at some personal level to sort of comment on that, because the AEF or what AEF stands for in a context like present Afghanistan is not unique to Afghanistan. We have had similar institutions, universities, and all around the world in the past, over hundreds of years, and even now, in places like Baghdad, for example, I can think of. But then, historically speaking, they've been all over the formerly colonized world, and so what it does is that a place like AUAF, and then that very particular stance towards the English language, what it does is it's a very systematic, very deliberate effort to deem native bodies of knowledge, including, of course, native languages and all their complexity and all their sort of richness, to deem them inferior and easily dismiss them as, of course, a collection of thoughts and principles and values of a bygone, traditional, quote unquote, pre-modern world, a world of values, a world of religion, a world of fellowship, I suppose, the things that we're talking about. And so this is very deliberate, but it's nothing unique to Afghanistan. It's just that we haven't had much sort of critical scholarly engagement with these things, and so my feedback or my advice, mashwarema, to our friends who are either current students at the AAF or aspiring to be students would be, as somebody who has formerly studied there and was very proud of very much being able to speak a good enough English, and always used to take a lot of pride in that, is to be careful to not turn that into a means for disengaging with native Afghan literature, adabiyat, zaban khod ma, and our own cultural priorities, right? So awlawiyat-hay farhangi ma is very important. The thing about the future leaders of this country, right? So what you said about this Nukhbagan business, that's part of the indoctrination, right, of a colonial system that comes in and indoctrinates and eventually produces what some would call a native intelligentsia, right? So a class of people that are, let's say, in case of Afghans, they're brown, they are nominally Muslim, they speak the part, they speak English with an accent, but yet, despite all of that, their cultural priorities, and in particular their political outlook, is all American, right? It's all about capitalism. It's all about essentially violence and violent assimilation of the other into our ways. And so that's nothing unique to AAF, but it has been happening all around the world. It's just that in Afghanistan it hasn't been talked as much about, or there are very little spaces allowed free enough to be able to engage with these ideas. I was told from the very beginning, or at least you got the feeling, that you are the future leader of this country, and that ultimately gets to people's heads. The other thing that they're doing, I don't know if you've talked about it at the center, quite a number of the graduates of that university end up going to United States on these Fulbright scholarships, almost very disproportionately, like the number of people that graduate there. And it has to do mainly because with the English language, because obviously English, the ability to speak in English is an automatic indicator of being smart and so on and so forth. But then what happens with these students, and quite a bit of them are my friends, is that they go and send them to these very conservative, very particular schools within the United States. Quite a few of them, in fact, end up in a very deliberate manner at this particular Bush school in Texas. And then they come back to Afghanistan, not only having had a very particular education, a master's degree mostly, but a master's degree from a very conservative, realist, pragmatic, American-centric schools. And then some of the people I interview for my research now tell me how very particular, mainly men, young men sort of start barging into the ministers' offices, telling them you don't know nothing, and that we know it all, and you better start listening to us. And they have the support of very higher ups in the government. It's disproportionate. It's unjust. It's wrong. It's again one of those cases of not learning from history, even our very, very recent past, because the Soviets did the exact same thing to people who subscribed to a very particular ideology, and then were kind of put to work along the same lines.
Please, Mujib, would you translate that all into Dari and explain that to the Afghan peace volunteers, because that is very illuminating for us, and I definitely want the APV to understand that as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I thought Hakim was translating.
Oh, is Hakim simultaneously?
I was hoping. Hakim, were you doing that?
No, I'm sorry.
No worries. خیر. So دوستای عزیز میبخشید خیلی من فکر کردم که حکیم ترجمه میکرد دیگه بالا رفتم. It's all about translation, right? It's about a symbolic interaction. یک مسئله مورد بحث میگیریم، یک چند سمبول میگیریم یا گرفته میشه توسط علاقات قدرتمند با او چسبانده میشه. برای ما گفته میشه که پانتون امریکایی خوب است، کل جوانا باید کوشش کنن که پانتون اول انگلیسی یاد بگیرن باز پانتون برون. پانتونای مذهبی کلش بد است به خاطر که میفهمی که کلش طالب تربیت میکنه. اما شما میفهمیم که در بین اینقدر زندگی اینقدر روشن نیست یا جوابا باید اینقدر 100% با قناعت کامل داده نمیشه. کسی به اون شکل جواب میده از حقیقت دنیا دوری داره. I hope that made sense.
تشکر مجیب جان، بسیار خوب بود. In short, the question from Qasim was, or the opinion of Qasim was that we have a problem with interpretation. And for example, if we misinterpret the words in the Quran, we may persist in our old ideas. Some of the interpretations passed down may be interpretations from 150 years or more ago, and Qasim feels that the youth should apply their minds to be able to interpret those teachings for the current present world. And Mujib has very wonderfully explained how this problem with interpretations is not unique to Islam, that it is present in every religion, especially the Abrahamic religions. It is for us to face the challenge of how we interpret the way the world is being translated to us, and how the symbols are used by, whether by religious institutions or academic institutions, to inform us about what they want us to understand as realities. It's important for all of us, including young people, to remain awake and to be able to use our minds and a change in our mindsets to think critically and creatively about the things that we are going through in our own personal and community lives. So thank you very much, Mujib. بعضی شما شاید هم یگان نظر دارین، ما سفرعلی شما در اونجا هستین، میشه که شما نظر خود بگین.
Thank you, Mujib. I'm very aware that you were short for time. How much longer do we have you for?
I think I just texted you. I've said I think I'll head out. So if it's fine with everyone, I'm actually some people are waiting for me, so I think I'll have to leave.
so much for your contribution. It was so interesting.
I'm very glad to have been a part of this once again. Thank you, everybody, and
Thank you.
I'll speak to you all soon.
And we very much hope you join us in the future.